get into our first presenter. Our first presenter this evening is Emily Renschler. She is a master instructor in the School of Education at Indian River State College and has over 14 years of teaching experience. Her background is in education, and she holds a bachelor's and a master's degree from Ball State University. She has completed AQ's Effective Teaching Practice course and is always looking for an exciting and new way to engage her students. So welcome, Emily, and thank you.
Thank you, Jody. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am Emily Renschler, and the strategy that I would like to share with you tonight is adding video components to your traditional assessments that you're already using. And so when I thought about why I chose this strategy, I have a couple of different reasons. It was sort of chosen for me at the beginning of my time at Indian River State College. I teach in the School of Education, so my students go through a journey before they become a teacher. They start out by doing video lessons. And so they're teaching to a very small audience, usually their own family members, and they're teaching this video. Then they move into doing structured field, then student teaching, and then they become a teacher. And when I started at IRSC, these video lesson plans were my absolute favorite thing to grade. I could grade papers all day, I could grade discussion boards all day, but what I looked forward to was actually seeing my students demonstrate the lesson plan that they'd written. Now they're actually teaching it in this video assessment, and I loved it. So over the years, I have been adding video lesson or video pieces, video assessments to my traditional assessments. So when I teach face-to-face, I have a classroom management class. And when I teach face-to-face, I wouldn't just ask my students, how would you greet parents for a parent-teacher conference? We talk a lot about parent-teacher conferences. I would actually have my students stand up, walk to the door, and act like they were greeting parents. I wouldn't have my students practice lining students up by telling me how they would do it. I wanted them to actually line students up. So in my face-to-face classes, my whole class lines up, and one of my students acts as the teacher and actually demonstrates how they would line students up. So I wanted to mimic that in my online classes. And when my original classes had a lot of discussion boards asking, how would you line students up? That sort of thing. And I wanted them to actually show me, because I felt like I could understand so much more of what they were sharing if I could actually see it. So I started having them make videos of these little tasks. And I found that those really were a much better way of seeing if my students were meeting our learning outcomes. So I've updated a lot of things, and the piece that I've added most recently is with discussion boards. And I will be honest, discussion boards are my least favorite thing to grade. I feel like, I'm trying to use some coffee terms, I feel like they get a little stale and they need a little bit more flavoring. So recently I have started adding some video components to my discussion boards. So that's why I chose this. I use this strategy in all of my classes, my online classes, my face-to-face, and my hybrid. But as of lately, I have really been focusing on how to make my online environment mimic that of my face-to-face environment, so that the equity between whatever modality of class you're taking is equitable for my students. So right now I'm going to focus on how I use these in my remote classrooms. So these are my students. As you can see, my students are overwhelmed by a lot of things they have on their plate. So I teach mostly bachelor level students. The courses that I teach are required for their degree. My students vary across all age groups, and they have a lot of other things on their plate. So most of my students are workers, and they typically work full-time jobs, 40 or more hours a week. A lot of my students are parents. A lot of my students just have a lot going on. So you can see I have a Bitmoji of a gentleman at work answering the phone, looking at his schoolwork at the same time. I have a tired Bitmoji. I have someone racing out of class because she has to go get to work. I have a disengaged student. I have a mom in the corner who's juggling, I think, breakfast and answering the phone, probably me telling her she missed an assignment. She has her coffee. I got a coffee in there to match our theme tonight. So I have found that with these learners, I have to keep them as engaged as possible. And one thing I've noticed is when I give a minimum for an assignment, sometimes that's what's met, is the minimum. So for example, in a discussion board, if I have, if I ask students to write 300 words, I will get 300 words, 301 words, 302 words. So when I started adding video discussions, I found that the responses that I was getting were much lengthier, much more in depth, and that's what I was hoping for. So how did I start by adding more videos? I'm going to give an example from a class that I teach. I teach a children's literature course, and one of our discussion boards asks students to take a nonfiction children's book and explain why it meets the criteria for being a good selection of literature. So the students discuss this in a discussion board, they write their post, they choose their book, write their post, and then they respond to a few peers. So this semester, I reworked this to include a video component. And what I asked the students to do was I asked them to actually have their book with them. And so they just made a quick video, and everything that they would have said in the discussion board, they shared. So they were actually able to open their book and share that, you know, XYZ is the good criteria. Here's where I found it in my book. And what I noticed is when I downloaded their transcripts of the what they had said in their video post, I had 1,000 words, 2,000 words, which is much more in depth than anything I used to get in the discussion boards. And it was a lot more fun to grade. And I actually felt their passion when they were talking about these books. So I look at something that I already have, an assignment I already have that meets my needs. And then I think, how can I add a video component to that? Oftentimes I keep the written assignment and I just add the video to it. But sometimes I do replace the video so they're not even doing the written part. Just depends on what I'm looking for. Another example is that students write a lot of lesson plans in my courses. And like I said at the beginning, the best way to tell if a lesson's going to work is by actually teaching it. You can write lesson plans all day, but until you're actually able to present it, you know, you don't really know what's working, what parts you want to change, what parts you want to keep. And so that's another reason. Next slide, please. So when I think about this, it's important to explain in your directions what you're looking for in regard to content, but also what you're looking for in regards to the video component. So you have to kind of add in that tech piece, how to do the video, what you're grading in the video. So you do need to adjust your rubrics. Sometimes if I'm including a written work and a video piece, sometimes I'll have two different rubrics. Sometimes I'll merge them into one rubric. I don't have a preference. Sometimes I take the written piece out completely. So then I do just merge the rubrics so that it's the content I'm looking for, but also the video presentation. In that children's literature class, I wanted to hear my students reading, because when it's taught face-to-face, you can have students read children's books aloud to the class. So in the video, a lot of the rubric was based around their voice, their excitement, you know, are they able to hold the book up and show the pictures to students as they're reading? So you have to adjust your rubrics when you add in a video component. And typically what I do is I start with one discussion per class and one project. So when I look at a class that I teach that does not have a video component, I try to add in one discussion board, and then I try to add in one project, and I see how that goes. I listen to students' feedback. I hear their questions. I look at the grading. Did I get more of what I was looking for? Was I able to effectively meet my learning outcomes? And then I move on from there. The way that I do this is through YouTube. I have my students video themselves, and then they upload it to YouTube, and they can send me a link. And that is what has worked the best for me thus far. The only drawback I've found is that sometimes YouTube can take a while to upload. So I do make sure that I tell students, if this is a lengthy video, you need to start uploading at least a day before in case you run into snags. But the majority of the assessments I add are sometimes a 45-second video or a minute video. So it's the same as what you would share in a discussion. I just want to hear you presenting it to me, because I just feel like that's a much better representation of what you actually know. So what I have learned is that students contributed much more when they're talking to a video. Oftentimes I tell my students to do the written part and then print it out and use that as your script. So they'll start their videos and they'll be reading from their script, and you'll see very quickly they put it down and they just start talking to you. And it feels as if you're sitting there in class with them and they're sharing, and whatever their script was, they're still hitting those points because they worked hard to prepare the written piece, but they're sharing so many more details that really help you see what they know. In my practicum course, where students are actually out teaching in the schools, I have a final exam question that asks for their aha moments. So you've been out in the field for 4 months, you've observed, you've listened, you've taught. What is it that you're taking away? And when we have this face-to-face, we discuss this. We sit in a circle and we discuss these aha moments. And it's one of my favorite times of the semester. And I've missed it. When I've been teaching online, I miss hearing those moments. So what I've done is I turn that into a video, and the students, briefly share a 2-3 minute video of what they found their aha moments are. And then they get to listen to each other's. And part of the final is accumulating everyone's thoughts and kind of wrapping up this semester. And I'll tell you, I've cried at these videos before because they're just way, you get so much more emotion out of them than if you were just reading the typed response to that. So another thing that I've learned, next slide please, is that I receive a lot of positive remarks. I was worried because the videos, I think, take more time to complete. They do require more technology to complete. And so I was worried about that part, but my course surveys at the end of each course have been very positive regarding the video assignments. Historically, I had students ask a lot of the tech side questions, but in the past 2 semesters, I have not received a single question about the technology behind creating a video, uploading a video, posting a video. So I think that's something that's becoming much more familiar to our students. In the future, I plan on continuing to use videos and making more assessments that are videos, but I do think I'm going to start allowing other formats besides YouTube. We have OneDrive at our campus, and that, I believe, is a more secure place where students can send me a link to their video that they house in their OneDrive account. And that way I think it'll be a little bit more private, because that has been a concern with YouTube, is that it's out there for the public to see. YouTube has worked well for me, and I want to give you a helpful tip. If you're using YouTube, your students have to adjust the privacy settings for the video so that when they send you the link, you're able to see it. My first few semesters, it would be very frustrating when you sat down to grade a video and you click the link and it says, account blocked, or you don't have permission to view this file. And then you have to email the student and they might not answer for a few days, and it really drags on the grading. So on my rubric now, I include it's 2 points. If your video doesn't open, it's 2 points off. And what I tell them is I say, send your link to a family member or a friend and have them log on first to make sure it works. Because when a student checks the link, it's obviously going to work because they're already logged in on their account from their computer. So they need to check the link from a different computer. So don't read this yet. I want to share something with you behind the scenes about this slide. So I teach a class where students already have their bachelor's degrees, okay? and they are taking this class on lesson planning. So I sometimes have students give me a hard time about making this lesson plan into a video. And I had a student this semester, this was really recent. It was almost as if he knew I was presenting on this and he wanted to give me a good quote. So this student said, "Why do I have to video this lesson? I have given presentations in my work for years. I know this is going to go well." And I said, "Well, it's part of the assignment, which is one reason, but I just really want you to have practice teaching to a group of students." And so finally he did do the lesson, and I got this email the next day. So I'm going to let you read this. So he compares teaching a lesson to juggling steak knives and doing your taxes, which I think is a very accurate representation of what teaching is like. And I'm going to keep this. I'm going to use this quote. I'm going to find a way to use it probably in every presentation because I just think it fits really well. You know, we know the content behind something, but demonstrating how to actually put it into play is a very different skill. And that's what I really want to capture in these assessments, is making sure that not only can they talk the talk, but they can walk the walk as well. So I want to leave you with one last extension idea. And this was a way that I found to mimic a face-to-face discussion. So when you're in class teaching and you have a discussion, students don't just keep saying the same comment over and over again. And I'm going to give an example. I teach a class on strategies, and I give my students this list of 30 strategies. And in class, they would be reading this list, and then I would say, "Okay, give me an idea of how you can use one of these in the classroom." And my students would say, "Okay, I can use blah, blah, blah in the classroom. Here's how." I'm like, "Awesome, great. Okay, next." We're not going to go around the room and everyone give that same strategy. They're going to pick a different strategy from the list. So one thing I've done recently for the online class is they have to make a video of sharing. And these videos were very short. We're talking 30 seconds. But what I asked was that no one could pick the same strategy, just like an in class. So if you posted 5th, you needed to watch the first 4 videos so that you weren't repeating a strategy. Which also meant that if you went 30th, you were watching 29 videos so that you didn't repeat a strategy. And that's what I also feel like mimicked the in class, because in class, you know, sometimes you're that student that wants to say something, but then someone else takes your idea, and then someone else takes your idea. And I had 2 things happen with this. One, my students were turning their work in so early, the whole last minute thing kind of prevented it, which was great on my end. But 2, they read each other's posts really deeply. And in a lot of their talks, they were sharing, similar to Jessica's idea, "I really liked how she did this, but I would tweak it, and I'm going to use this strategy in a similar way to so-and-so." And they were just really building on what the others had said. And that's more than I got in my typical discussion board posts. So I have found this to be very effective, and I hope that something I said might trigger an idea of something that you want to do with one of your existing assessments.
Thank you, Emily. It's definitely triggered a lot of thoughts, questions coming in through the chat. So I'm going to start feeding them to you in the order that they came in, and I'll ask Jody or someone else on the copy team to give me a cue when it's time to move on to the next presenter. Okay. So first question that came in, how do you accommodate for hearing impaired students with video discussion forums / responses?
I've only had this concern once or twice, and I was able to use the audio visual aids that the college provided with the student, and they were able to submit that way. I have done one-on-one calls with students before where we were able to talk one-on-one using some different visual aids. Also, when you use YouTube and all videos are closed caption, so they're able to get a transcript of what each video says. So when other students, when their peers are presenting and they need to listen to what the peer said, they can get a printed transcript of their presentation.
Great, thanks. Next question. What if a student isn't willing to have his or her image on YouTube? Have you run into that problem?
I've had that one happen a few times. I've had 3 different ways that I've worked with a student. One, I've allowed them to just present a voice recording, and they could do that. If they're still not comfortable with that, I have allowed them to send me the video privately, so it's not posted on YouTube. It's more in something like a OneDrive or a Google Drive where they house it, and I just have the link personally to see it. And then I've worked with them on doing something else. Usually they're still able to comment on peers. It's just they're not getting peer feedback. Sometimes students have been more willing to do it in a small group. So they'll let their group members hear, or see the video. They just don't want the whole class to. And then finally, I did have one student that came and delivered a flash drive to me where I could watch his video piece. And that one was due to the fact that he used students whose parents did not want them on YouTube as he used students. He's my student, but he used students, and then they didn't want their image on YouTube. But great question.
Makes sense. Okay. Do you require or ask them to use YouTube? Is that your preferred platform since it automatically does the caption and transcript?
That is my favorite reason for choosing YouTube, is because it does the caption transcript. I'm able to watch them from anywhere. I don't have to log on and have special permissions. So I do like that part as well. I have always used YouTube. Like I said, I'm toying with the idea of adding OneDrive or like a Google Drive of some kind where they can just send me the link, but it's housed in a more secure space. But I have used YouTube and exclusively, and it has worked very well.
Okay, the next one's an interesting one about measuring enthusiasm. How do you measure enthusiasm, or do you measure it?
That's a great question. I usually have something in the rubric about, it depends on what I'm assessing. With reading a children's book, obviously I want to hear the enthusiasm in your voice. So I always have a category on there about voice. A lot of the other videos, I don't. So the strategy video that I just shared where they had to name a strategy and how they would use it in the class, I didn't have anything on there about enthusiasm. Similar to if we were having a discussion in class, in a face-to-face class, I'm more looking for what you're saying there and not how energetically you say it in that. So it just kind of depends on what the assessment calls for.